You ever feel like you bought the ticket but watching only half of the show, knowing that there's more? So we've been traveling along together in a 7-week series that is based on the spiritual lessons from The Wizard of Oz. We've been using a book by Jean Houston, The Wizard of Us, Transformational Lessons from Oz. And if you've been following along, you know that we're in week 5, and so we're heading on down the yellow brick road. To just some foundational things, the main character in The Wizard of Oz, of course, is Dorothy. And do you remember, both in Latin and Greek, Dorothy means God's gift or gift of God. And that represents who and what we all are, that we are all a gift or an expression of God. Dorothy is traveling with her fearless little companion who is ever by her side, Toto. Toto comes from the Latin in toto, which means total, all that is, everything, representing our soul. It is Toto who often does things that sort of get her in trouble, which cause her to go somewhere that she may not have chosen to go by herself, but she needed to go there. It's also Toto that fetches things and brings things into her life, opportunities, whatever she may need at the time. So it is with our soul, that our soul is guiding us along. And how many of you know that your soul has its own agenda that may not necessarily be what you had in mind? Yeah, there's a plan, what we call sometimes a higher plan. There's a higher plan to be experienced and expressed here, and we would call that our soul's plan. So Dorothy's been traveling along on this yellow brick road with her ruby red slippers, and she encounters along the way and now has traveling with her the Scarecrow. Just at the time when she didn't know how to make a decision, she encounters the Scarecrow who needs a brain. Just at the time she picks an apple and afraid she's unintentionally hurt someone, she meets the Tin Man who needs a heart. And then as she's singing lions and tigers and bears, oh my, she manifests a tiger, this tiger who is afraid and needs courage. And so she's traveling along now with wisdom and heart and courage, which is the centerpiece of who we are. It's the centerpiece of the sacred scriptures. It's what we're seeking to really embody. In Buddhism, as I talked about last week, they talk about our spiritual presence of awakening is like a bird with 2 wings. One wing is wisdom and the other wing is compassion. That we are always awakening into wisdom and love, compassion. But these wings need a body, and the body of the bird is courage, that it takes courage, and we are all of these things. So now we are traveling down the yellow brick road, all of them together, the whole gang, which represents our whole self, our higher self, and the Emerald City is in sight. And so we're going to watch about a 3-minute clip that picks up and takes us where we are today.
And now, my beauty, something with poison in it, I think. With poison in it, but attractive to the eye and soothing to the smell. Poppies. Poppies will put them to sleep. Now they'll sleep.
Must be a wonderful wizard to live in a city like that.
Oh, come on, Anne. What are we waiting for?
Nothing. Let's hurry.
Yes, let's run.
Come on. Come on. Hurry, hurry. Oh, look. Come on. You can see it here. It's wonderful. Emerald City.
What's happening? What is it? I can't run anymore. I'm so sleepy. sleepy.
Here, give us your hands and we'll pull you along.
Oh, no, please. I have to rest for just a minute. Toto, where's Toto?
Oh, you can't rest now. We're nearly there. Don't cry. You'll rust yourself again.
Come to think of it, 40 weeks wouldn't be bad.
Don't you start it, too.
No, we ought to try and carry Dorothy.
I don't think I could, but we could try.
Len.
Yes.
Oh, look at him. This is terrible.
Here, Tin Man, help me.
Oh.
Oh, this is terrible. Can't budge an inch. This is the spell, this is.
It's the Wicked Witch. What do we do?
Help! Help! It's no use screaming at a time like this. Nobody will hear you. Help! 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 It's snowing. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. Oh, maybe that'll help. Oh, but couldn't help. Does help. Dorothy, you're waking up.
Oh.
Unusual weather we're having, ain't it?
Look, he's rusted again. Oh, give me the oil can, quick.
Here.
Oh, quick. Oh,
He is rusty.
here.
Here.
Oh, quick. Oh.
Curse it! Curse it! Somebody always helps that girl. But shoes are no shoes. I'm still great enough to conquer her. And woe to those who try to stop her.
Come on, let's get out of here. Look, Emerald City is closer and prettier than ever.
So Poppy Fields, where, we've seen a theme of being stuck and moving beyond being stuck. So now it's going to sleep, which is another way of being stuck. But there's an interesting thing. If you think about all these characters representing an aspect of you, here they are in the field yelling for help, and part is asleep. Have you ever noticed within yourself, part of you was yelling for help and part of you was asleep? Part of you is saying, please, change is needed. And the other part is saying, I'm just enjoying it just fine here. Well, that's sort of the conundrum or the opportunity that we're talking about today, and what it means to be falling asleep and to be waking up. Gene Houston says, millions of people right now are experiencing a yearning and a desire to awaken to their unique gifts and offer them in service to the world, while at the same time living a life of joy and fulfillment. It is a surging of the human spirit, a virtual global awakening on a scale that no one has seen before. Just coming back from the Parliament of World Religions in Utah, I can tell you there is a surging of the human spirit, a global awakening on a scale that no one has seen before. Simply put, people are longing to finally feel fully alive at one, step into their unique purpose in life. And it takes courage, it takes love, it takes a lot of things to do these. So we're feeling this. How many of you are aware of that? You feel something, that it's times that something in you is literally evolving you, calling you. Well, then she says also part of the human condition, she calls this scene sort of the danger zone. How many projects have floundered at the threshold of accomplishment because people got lax and lost vigilance? Human beings tend to get sleepy or fall into apathy when they get close to their goals. Why does it happen? What are the things that block us? It takes a lot of energy to stay on the path, and the diversions of this world are strong. There's many things that, how many of you have really had a goal and you're on fire and you're working towards that goal? You can see it, and then something happens. And before you know it, you're caught up and carried away in the something that happened. They say that, life is the journey. It's not the destination. It's really what we're doing along the way. That there's always this opportunity to awaken, to further awaken. There's a number of scriptures that talk about waking up and staying awake. Christopher Fry has a quote that says, "The tasks before us today are soul-sized." I love that. And I think the opportunities before us today are soul-sized. The invitation before us today is a soul-sized invitation. And there's a part of us that is screaming for help. Yes, let's go forward. And another part of us that is asleep. Remember the story of Jesus in the Bible before the crucifixion when he's in the garden and he asked the disciples, would you tarry with me? Would you stay with me? And what did they do? They fell asleep. And he said, could you not stay awake with me? Acknowledging that falling asleep is a part of our experience. In Thessalonians it says, so let us not sleep as others do, but let us be alert and sober. And then in Luke, watch yourselves, lest your heart be weighed down with distractions and the cares of life, but stay awake at all times. And then in Matthew, when it talks about to watch and to pray, because it says, because the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. If you notice in this scene, everyone that went asleep was a being of flesh. That the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And so realizing that that is a part of who we are. And the tendency to go to sleep, just as we need physical sleep, there's a tendency to go to sleep and to get lackadaisical or to get stuck. That's a way that we can get stuck. And so today we're going to look at that and how can we, being aware of it, cooperate with it so we continually are awakening. Guy Finley, as she quoted earlier, says, the spiritually awakened life is not something that one achieves like an award for fine art or some other measured performance. The true higher life comes to us naturally and reveals and expresses in anyone who realizes that like the sun above us and the light within us, it is always present. That this light is always awakening within us and dawning within us. That there's always a new dawning, always an opportunity to experience and express more. If you ever doubt that, just check your heartbeat. If your heart is beating and you're breathing, you have skin on, as I say, there is still something for you to do here. Do you know that to be true? And do you really believe that about yourself, that there's a purpose, that we're spirit here in form, and that there's a spiritual purpose for your being here? And so staying awake and staying engaged. I remember when I was in elementary school, how many of you can remember that far back or that recent back? We have our YOU with us, they'll remember that. And I can remember that elementary and then going into junior high when we used to change classes, if there were subjects and teachers that I really liked and I was engaged, if I was interested and engaged, I listened, I would ask questions, I would participate, I would do my reading, I would do the homework. And if I did all of those things, I assimilated the information, I learned, I would grow. It was pretty easy. But in those classes, if I did not like the subject matter or I didn't like the teacher, and I would find myself just kind of staring out the window or doodling and not engaged, not asking questions, not listening. And God forbid, if I didn't do the homework, those were the areas that I would struggle. And so it is with our spiritual life. It is that clear that when we remember to be actively engaged in our soul's involvement and unfoldment, when we're interested in our own spiritual growth and our own spiritual journey, that in and of itself helps keep us awake. How many of you have experienced what you would call a wake-up call? You know, we all know what that term means. I don't even have to explain it. Someone before service, before they even knew what it was about, told me about someone in their family, and they used the words, they said they had a wake-up call this week because they had a health problem. And we know what that means. That when these wake-up calls come, it's typically an invitation to reprioritize your life. Usually when there's a wake-up call, people say, I'm going to stop doing X, Y, and Z, and it's time for me to start doing A, B, and C. That these wake-up calls, we know all of a sudden something, it's like throwing cold water in our face, and it's time, we realize something, it's time to do things differently. But it doesn't need to take those drastic wake-up calls, hopefully. Every day is an invitation. Every day is a subtle or as overt as we will see it. We can look at the trees and see the trees changing and realize I'm also being impelled from the inside out. How am I being called to wake up and evolve? The first thing that is always that we're waking up is to put spirit at the forefront of our life. There's a great song by Carrie Underwood that says, She was driving last Friday on her way to Cincinnati on a snow-white Christmas Eve, going home to see her mama and her daddy with the baby in the back seat. 50 miles to go, and she was running low on faith and gasoline. It had been a long, hard year. She had a lot on her mind, and she didn't pay attention. She was going way too fast. Before she knew it, she was spinning on a thick black sheet of glass. She saw both of their lives flash before her eyes. She didn't even have time to cry. She was so scared, she threw her hands up in the air and she sang, "Jesus at the wheel, take it from my hands, 'cause I can't do this on my own. I'm letting go, so give me one more chance. Save me from this road I'm on. Jesus at the wheel." Now, Carrie Underwood sings a little bit better than that, but how many of you have heard that song? Great song. And you may not necessarily think of Jesus at the wheel, but it's putting your spiritual nature in the forefront. It's putting in the driver's seat your soul's calling, whatever it is that is to be forefront. Those things that when we have wake-up calls, what are we being called into? Every wake-up call has within it inherent three things. The first thing a wake-up call is always asking us is what we refer to, what traditional Christianity refers to in the term when it says you're to be born again. The disciples asked Jesus, "What do you mean to be born again? We can't go back into the mother's womb." And he said, "No, it's to know yourself as spirit." You see, to be born again is to realize that you are not just flesh and bone, but that you are spirit. You are the expression of God. Jesus said, "Do you not know you are the temple of God?" So the first thing every wake-up call has inherent within it is, who do you know yourself to be? Who am I? And who am I being at any moment? Halloween reminded me of how I just saw a picture of Jean with hair for Halloween. And And sometimes when we were kids and we were acting out, my mother would say, "You do not have on an ugly costume. Act like you're supposed to." That it's time to snap out of it. That was her wake-up call and saying, remember who you are. Remember what you know and how you're being called to show up, to remember who you are. That each and every one of us have that opportunity every day of our life. There's 10 things that says you may be spiritually asleep if you spend time thinking about the lives of others and how they ought to live. You may be spiritually asleep if you talk excessively and listen rarely. You may be spiritually asleep if your first inclination is to meet what the moment asks of you with a no. You may be spiritually asleep if you are unable to say, "I am sorry," when it's appropriate to do so. When you harbor an enemy in your heart, when you believe they are the matter with you. If you're always on the move or in a rush or like that pumpkin, that's a wake-up call for something. The pumpkin just rolled. If you're always on the move or in a rush or distracting yourself, numbing yourself, unable to be at peace with yourself, you may be spiritually asleep. But have no fear, wake up. Your soul will not let you rest. There's a wake-up call being broadcast just your way to remember who you are in every way. There's a story about a young man who was in college and he was studying to be a naturalist. And he went out to a farm because at the edge of the farm was this huge cliff and eagles were often seen, and he wanted to go and see the eagles. And so he came up to ask the farmer if he could travel across his farm to this cliff, and he couldn't believe what he saw. As he walked up to the farmer, there was a bunch of chickens. The farmer was standing there feeding chickens, and within the little baby biddies was a little eaglet, a baby eagle. And he said, "I can't believe you've got an eagle right here." And he said, "Yeah, he thinks he's a chicken." The farmer didn't think anything of it. But the naturalist, the student, said, "Well, he can't think he's a chicken. He's an eagle." And he said, "Well, he thinks he's a chicken. I feed him like a chicken. He acts like a chicken. He thinks he's a chicken." And the naturalist said, "Well, I have to help him. Can I do something?" And he said, "Do whatever you think you can." And so he reached down and he picked him up and he took him across the property until he got to that cliff, and he held him up and he said, "You are not a chicken, you are an eagle, you're meant to fly." Well, the eagle didn't do anything. "You're not a chicken, you're an eagle, you're meant to fly." The eagle, of course, didn't do anything. He wanted to get back down and go back and be with the chickens and eat the food on the ground. But day after day, the young naturalist would not give up. And he would hold him and he'd fluff him up a little bit and try to encourage him to discover his own wings. And as the story goes, eventually, after doing that enough, one day, that little eaglet started to flutter and took off and was able to fly. And the story reminds me of the quote by Marianne Williamson that says, "We are meant to fly at full wingspan for the glory of the one that sent us." That life is always asking us, who do you know yourself to be? Would you give me this affirmation? There's an affirmation that we can work with that will help us quicken our own spiritually awakening. It says, "I am being the expression of infinite, unlimited life." Would you say that with me? I am being the expression of infinite, unlimited life. And so knowing who you are is a part of every wake-up call. The second part of every wake-up call is knowing what you are capable of. I love what Reverend Laura read earlier when she talked about we have this repository of treasure inside of us that we're waking up to, we're discovering. Every wake-up call is about discovering yourself in a new way, learning yourself in a new way. There's a story of a fisherman, group of fishermen were out one beautiful day fishing, and this particular guy seemed to be out fishing everyone. He would cast it in and catch a fish, but just as he caught a fish, he would pull out and he'd measure it, and then he'd throw it back in. No time at all, he'd catch another fish, pull it out and measure it, throw it back in. He's catching really nice fish. Keeps going on, he catches a fish, measures it, throws it back in. Finally, one of the guys down from him couldn't stand it anymore. He thought, what is this guy doing? He's catching more fish than anyone. These are beautiful fish. He certainly hadn't caught his limit. Why is he throwing them back in? And he went over as he watched him catch another one, measure it, throw it back in. And he said, "Sir, I can't help but notice you're catching fish and beautiful fish. You're measuring them and you're throwing them back in. Why?" And the guy reached in his bag and he pulls out, he said, "Yeah, these are great fish, but they're not for me." He said, "You see, I've got a little frying pan at home. And I just can't handle those big fish." And the guy, of course, said, "Well, why don't you get a bigger frying pan?" But where in your life are you working really hard to make it fit in this former pan? We work and we try so hard to make it fit in this little pan. There's a story in the book. See, the baby said, "Amen." The pumpkin and the baby have got it going on today. They hear what Spirit is saying. There's a story in 2 Kings about a woman known as the widow woman with the oil. The prophet Elisha, her husband had worked for the prophet Elisha, and her husband was killed. This woman was left with 2 sons. And in this culture and in this time, if you couldn't pay your own way, they would literally come and take your house, your belongings, and even your children. And then the women would go and live with each other as the widow women. So here she was, a husband just died. She has 2 young sons and nothing. And she sees that her life is soon going to look like this little pan. And she finds that prophet Elijah and she says, "Help, help," and tells him her story. And he said, "Well, tell me one thing. What do you have?" And see, the widow in us represents the part of us that is known by what we don't have. And she said, "I don't have anything." And he said, "Surely you have something. What do you have?" And she said, "All I have is a little bit of oil and a little bit of meal, just enough to make a last meal for my sons and for me." And he said, "Go back to your house and go to your neighbors, and I want you to borrow pots. All the pots you can gather, and take all those empty pots into your house. And then close your house up and pray to the Holy Spirit and begin to pour the little bit of oil that you do have." And as the story goes, when she did that, as she began to pour the oil that she did have, something miraculous happened. The oil didn't stop. It filled up every single pot she had. And the prophet said, go and sell it. You'll have all the money that you need. Now, what that story symbolizes, it's our story and our own consciousness. It's a story of saying, you will always find places in your life where you're going to encounter this. You're trying to make your life fit in an old pattern, an old way of believing, an old way of being. It's human nature to go to sleep and to try to live in this old, little, limited way. But the Spirit in you is saying, I want you to find spaces of possibility. I want you to go and create spaces of possibility. And it is in that space that I will pour out the blessings that will flow through you. And so I ask you again, in your life, where in your life, maybe are you stuck or asleep and life has really become about the size of this pan for you? So every wake-up call, who am I? Who do I know myself to be? What am I capable of? You're capable of more than you know. Would you show me that affirmation again? Would you say this with me again? I am actively being the expression of infinite, unlimited life. Now we're not just being, we are actively being the expression of infinite, unlimited life. That's who we are. Who are we? What are we capable of? And then the third thing that will be inherent in every wake-up call is, what's your focus? What are you pouring yourself into right now? Where are you just still stuck in the past? How many of you remember maybe in high school you had to read Homer's Odyssey? It was not fun at the time. All the high school students over here are remembering the Iliad and the Homer and the writings back from, I think, 700 or 800 or 900 BC. In this story, Odysseus is the main character. Odysseus has been away at war, fighting in the Trojan War for 10 years, and is a great warrior, is a great seaman, he was a great man at sea, a warrior, is very accomplished. And he's finally traveling back to his home in Ithaca. And he's been fighting for 10 years, and now it takes him 10 years to get home. So he's been through all these things, overcome so much. He finally gets home, and it's time to celebrate. He is recognized as a great hero. He feels like he's a hero. He's accomplished a lot. And when he's just about to get comfortable with his life that could very quickly begin to look like this, a soothsayer, as the story goes, a spiritual person comes up to him and says, you can't stay yet. Take your oar, your favorite boat oar, and travel and go out into a distant land. Go so far that nobody recognizes you. And when you've gone that far, then go even so far inland that nobody even recognizes what a boat oar is. And when you're at a place that nobody recognizes any of that, bury it. And offer it up as an offering of sacrifice to the gods, meaning, I give thanks for all that has come before. And then he said, and plant a garden. Plant a garden on top of all that has come before, and then go back and begin to know yourself in a new way. You see, the power in that story is don't ever get stuck. So often we focus on not only our past challenges, Richard, would you give me that song? But we also focus on our past successes, the things that really worked, how we know ourselves. We know ourselves by this, we know ourselves by that. But the Spirit is always saying, keep planting it all. Let it be fertilizer for a new garden, that you're here to bring forth more. That where are you focused? Ernest Holmes, who was a contemporary to our co-founders, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, wrote, we should never lose sight of the fact that the soul is on the pathway of the endless and ever-expanding experience, and that only by expansion can it evolve, accepting the lessons and experiences of the past and taking the best from everything. You see, this is key, taking the best from everything. We should press boldly forward, looking ever for the truth. The truth where? The truth about who we are. The truth about what we're capable of. The truth about how the Spirit of God is seeking to use us wherever we are. And ever ascending higher and higher into the realm of reality. There is no limit to the possibility inherent in all individuals. This week, I invite you to use technology, perhaps your phone. Set it so that it chimes a couple of times during the day to wake you up in the middle of whatever you're doing, and just to have you stop, and so you can say, I am actively being the expression of infinite, unlimited life. I am actively being the expression of infinite, unlimited life. It's in every one of us to be wise.